welcome to the show. So Professor Jeffery Sachs, it's 4 years. How do you characterize the current situation after 4 years of, back and forth between the two sides?
Well, this is a very grim and costly war, as you said in the introduction. Russia is prevailing gradually, but prevailing, because this is a war of attrition. Russia is the larger side. It is wearing down the Ukrainian side. And in fact, and very sadly, this war could have been ended 4 years ago, right at the beginning of Russia's special military operation. The two sides came together and basically reached an agreement that the United States and the United Kingdom blocked in April 2022. So the tragedy is this could have been stopped immediately. It could have been avoided earlier. This is a war that arose because of a wrong-headed U.S. attempt to push NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia in a rather deliberate provocation to surround Russia. And Russia reacted. We're at war. The war could have stopped in April 2022. It should stop immediately now. It's a tragedy, and everybody's losing. Ukraine, certainly, Russia, Europe, very badly, is paying a very heavy price with an economy in decline as a result of this war. Nobody wins from this.
Nobody wins from the war. Ruslan, share with us, what's the public sentiment, after 4 years inside Ukraine? Are they with the government? Are they determined to continue? As we said, there's no end of the war inside yet.
It looks like Ukrainian elites, Ukrainian society, and not only Ukraine, but also in Europe and United States, got used to it. Got used to this situation, and they made some kind of behavior to how to survive in this war and how to even earn the benefits in this war. And the Ukrainian public opinion sentiments in the elites also are different. Of course, we have so-called deal-making party, part of our elites which are ready to maybe sign some agreement, even with concessions, and to find the end of this war. And also we have a bigger party in elites, which I can call status quo party, which insists in continuation of the war, because war gives a lot of power, unlimited power. War earns a lot of money. Talking about society, Ukrainian society is still very scary. And this scary is a management tool for elites toward Ukrainian society. From one point of view, a strong majority of Ukrainian society, from 70 till 80% of Ukrainian people are standing for the ending of the war. They are willing to end this war, this very bloody, very suffering war. But from another point of view, majority, near 50 till 60% of Ukrainians are not ready to go to some concessions, which are very necessary to end this war, because we need to find some kind of compromise between the sides in this war, in this situation when no one is defeated. I agree with my colleague that Ukraine is not winning this war. But Ukraine, we cannot say that Ukraine could be defeated in the nearest future. And so, because war is going on, no one can predict what will be the end of this war, because a lot of black swans over our heads all the time, and Prigozhin Cup, for example, in Russia in 2023, also was a very significant sign that Russian political system is not very stable also.
Professor Sachs, 4 years into the war, as you said, also supported by some studies, total military casualties on both sides, killed and wounded are in the hundreds of thousands. And the UN has verified tens of thousands of civilian deaths. It warned that the true number is likely higher. Are we close to any tipping point to say, both sides, the majority of the people would say enough is enough, we have to stop the war? Or what are the major factors that will determine the course of the war?
The issues to stop the war are clear. Russia will never tolerate U.S. or European military bases in Ukraine. Russia regards that as a core national security threat. The United States would never tolerate Russian or Chinese military bases in Mexico or Canada. Russia's position is perfectly sensible. The U.S. never should have pushed NATO enlargement. Ukraine needs to recognize its neutrality is the key to peace. Unfortunately, the current regime in Ukraine, which was brought in by a coup backed by the United States in February 2014, does not recognize this or accept this. This is the biggest tragedy. Second, there needs to be security guarantees for Ukraine and for Russia. This is a two-sided security dilemma. And this means that there needs to be mutual security. Russia doesn't want Western forces or Western missile systems on its border. Ukraine does not want further attacks. And the third is the territorial issue, which is really tragic. The reason that it's tragic is that up until the fall of 2022, Russia did not demand any annexation. Russia demanded autonomy for the ethnic Russian region of eastern Ukraine. That was the Minsk II agreement. It was passed unanimously by the UN Security Council. The United States and Ukraine and UK killed that agreement. This is what's so sad. The United States was uncompromising and very arrogant after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it led Ukraine into this complete debacle. My point is that there could be peace. It could be reached today, but not if there's a small clique in Kyiv that's making money from this or sees its own political future in very narrow terms. The country's exhausted. The war needs to stop. The killing is tragic. The way to stop the war is absolutely clear, and it should be stopped.
Mm-hmm. Well, Professor, you know, many people, like in the European countries, including people in Ukraine, they would describe the situation as, you know, Russia, attacked Ukraine, and then that's the war. That's the whole picture. But for a lot of people, including, I think, you included, would say this is much larger than Ukraine and Russia. This is about Russia versus the U.S., Russia versus the entire West, the NATO countries there.
Oops, I lost the sound.
Yeah, can you hear me now, Professor? Seems we have a tech glitch there. So Ruslan.
And now I hear you. Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm saying that some people would see
coming in and out for some reason. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's all right if you can get the point there. What I'm trying to say is like according to what you said, this war is much larger than Ukraine and Russia. This is about U.S., Russia. This is about the European Union and Russia. Yes. The entire West versus Russia. Countries including China and many from the global South would say there need of a European-wide security structure to make sure everybody is secure. That's a solution, not just about Russia and Ukraine. And we are also seeing the U.S., the shift of policy and attitudes from Joe Biden administration to the current Trump administration. And of course, the European Union is standing, at least from what they are talking, firmly behind Ukraine. What do you make of the entire situation right now?
Yes, let me say this war goes back to February 1990. It did not start in February 2022. It started in February 1990. That is when Germany and the United States promised to President Gorbachev and to President Yeltsin that NATO would not enlarge eastward. They made a firm commitment. They lied about it because after 1991, the United States and Germany pushed for NATO enlargement. And not just NATO enlargement all the way to Ukraine and all the way to Georgia. The goal was to surround Russia in the Black Sea. This was spelled out by Zbigniew Brzezinski, among others, in the late 1990s. This was part of a U.S. attempt to weaken Russia, to surround Russia, to reduce Russia's power. This is the cause of this war. To say that it started in February 2022, unfortunately, is a Western narrative. It's not true. This war goes back to a lot of cheating by the United States that started already in the 1990s, by the U.S. abandoning the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002, by the United States supporting a coup in Ukraine in February 2014, and by the United States blocking an agreement between Ukraine and Russia in April 2022. This is the true story, but unfortunately, it is not the story that I hear from my own government. I wish I did, because if I heard the truth, if the public heard the truth, this war never would have happened, and it would have ended a long time ago.
No, lastly, I know you are going to leave very soon. Professor, what would you say the impact of the war on the European countries who are now standing behind Ukraine but facing, some of the, the change of the U.S. policy? President Zelensky said, only the U.S. Can stop the war. We wish the U.S. would be on our side. He's indicating like the U.S. is on the side of Russia.
Yes, the European leaders have no support in their countries. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, has a 10% approval rating. Emmanuel Macron in France has a 10% approval rating. Chancellor Merz in Germany has something like an 18% approval rating. Why? Because Europe is in crisis because of this war. The Europeans are making a huge mistake. They cut themselves off from the low-cost energy coming from Russia. They cut themselves off from other trade with Russia. They did great damage to their own economy, and the public in Europe does not want war. It's the political elite that wants this war to continue. It's Zelensky in Ukraine. It's Starmer, Macron, Merz. This is a small group that wants this war to continue. It's tragic. The public wants the war to stop.
Thank you, Professor Jeffery Sachs. Thank you for speaking to us. Ruslan, let's continue as we mentioned about European support and the previously U.S. support. Previously under the Biden administration, U.S. was the primary military and financial backer of Ukraine, providing tens of billions of dollars in security assistance and also arms. But this has changed, and Donald Trump, pushing for Europe to shoulder more of the burden and Ukraine to accept territorial concessions or losses. How does Ukraine see the role of the U.S., which is now basically bring the two sides together to negotiate a settlement for the war?
In Ukraine and Europe in general, elites are considering this situation as a temporary situation. It looks like they are still waiting for some changes in American policy or in internal American political balances after midterm elections. This year in November it will happen in the United States, or after the next presidential elections. Ukraine and Europe, in such a terms, they are in strategic waiting for the changes from United States. But at the same time, they are not trying to don't provoke Trump for some sharp doings against Ukraine and Europe. They're trying to keep the dialogue with Trump. They are saying thank you, Trump, Mr. Trump, very often, almost every day for 10 times. Of course, it's kind of joke. It's an attempt to keep the balance with United States and waiting the changes. Of course, Europe now is covering all Ukrainian needs, and Europe increased the supplies for Ukraine military and financial supplies for Ukraine in 2 times last year because of absence American military and financial support. But Europe is still very incoherent, and European policy could not be stable for a long time. And Ukraine accepts these risks, and Ukraine is trying to maneuver between Europe and the United States in these terms. But even taking account the absence of American military and financial support, we need to understand that the American presence in Ukraine is still very crucial for Ukrainian defense, because United States military intelligence support, United States trade and sale the weapon to Ukraine through the European mechanism is extremely important, the most important, crucial for Ukrainian defense now. Talking about the United States demands on the territorial concessions, it looked like Ukrainian government is trying some kind to softening these demands, and Ukraine is not declining these demands, but Ukraine is not approving these demands also. Zelensky and his team are not going to accept any territorial formal concessions, and Ukraine is still insisting on a ceasefire through the battle line, as it was in previous preliminary Chinese suggestions in 2023. This is unfortunately Ukraine declined that Chinese suggestions in 2023, but nowadays it is official Ukrainian position.
Yeah. Do you think it is wise, for the Europeans or the Ukrainian government to wait for internal changes inside the U.S., for example, with the midterm election?
I think it's not very wise policy, and I think we need to find a solution, compromise, and new balance to reach the peace. But it's a very safe way for Ukrainian and European political elites. Ukraine is still able to resist, so there is no significant risk to be defeated in the war nearest years. And it let the sides, the Ukraine and Europe, to wait some changes. Because to be honest, frankly speaking, nowadays political risks for political elites in Ukraine and Europe of ending of the war is much bigger than to keep in the war, to continue this war. So this is the main reason: money reason, power reason, and risks of the ending of the war and changes of the regimes after the war. This is the main technical barriers to find the peace. In general terms, less phrased only, I need to end to this war. We need the more sovereign Europe, because the key of this conflict in the Europe, I'm not fully agreed with my previous colleagues that it is confrontation only between the United States and Russia. No, the main interest of Russia is Europe. In market terms, in defense, in security terms, the relations between Europe and Russia are in the core of this conflict. If Europe will be more sovereign and more willing to the peace negotiation, more able to put on the table their leverages and their concessions towards Russia and Ukraine at the same time, I think the peace could be much closer than it is now.
A good point you mentioned about European Union to be more sovereign, and also you pointed out the fact that they are not at the table for negotiation arranged by Washington. Ukraine, Russia, U.S. You would expect the presence of European Union delegations, but obviously they are not there. Do you think they are demanding for their presence? Or, some European leaders said, the U.S. representing us, and the U.S. talked to us about their approach, after or before the dialogue. Is that the case?
We've seen the European delegation in the side events of the last Geneva meeting. It was Europeans were there, but they were not a part of official dialogue. And I think it's because that Europe still is very divided. We have a minority of European countries which are insisting on negotiation and peace, and we have majority of European countries, mostly from Western Europe and Northern Europe, which are insisting on the strategy of defeating Russia, of exhaustion of the Russia. And so, because Europe divided, Europe is not able to put on the table its own concessions, which are very necessary to find the new compromise and balance. And till the time that Europe will not be ready to find some to go to some compromises, this war could not be ended because Europe has significant influence, the majority influence on Ukraine and Russia, both sides. In Ukraine, in terms of military and financial supplies, and enter into European Union at the same time, and security guarantees for Ukraine. For Russia also, it's a question of security guarantees for energy market, for Russian energy products, and also Russian frozen assets, and many different other issues, including sanctions and so on. We need to rebuild the European strategy towards a conflict. We need to new approach to the deterrence. It's not only increasing military capabilities, but also negotiations and readiness to concessions. We will be much closer to the end of this war.
Right. And now we have Anne-Elisabeth, Paris-based columnist for the Telegraph. Welcome to the show, Anna. So 4 years and entering the 5th year, the crisis in Ukraine, the war there. European countries, European Union are standing behind Kyiv firmly there. But at the same time, they do see the change of the U.S. attitudes, U.S. policy toward Ukraine war. Is there a concern? Do you think the European support is enough for Ukraine to sustain the war?
I think European support is certainly important, but I think what is enough is that the Ukrainians do not want to be annihilated as a country, which is the avowed aim of Putin and the people who advise him. And to them, it is not a choice. President Zelensky has said this several times. I will do what the people want, and the people do not want to disappear. And they also do not want to have those Ukrainians who voted for independence at the referendum 1991 in a vast majority, 91% altogether for the entire country. It was 87 for the oblast in the east. It was only 64 for Crimea, but it was still a majority. And essentially the country has not changed its mind. The country does not want to disappear.
Ruslan from Kyiv made a good point earlier. He said that the Europeans have a like a strong interest in the situation in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia, and they need to be more like independent, more sovereign in terms of their role in Ukraine crisis. But right now, the negotiating the peace process is basically arranged and determined by Washington. I mean, the European Union is not even present at the table. Is that the ideal situation, or what can the European Union do probably to better defend their interests?
Well, I mean, it's not a question of, we are being neglected, but mostly it's, there's a peace process, not the peace process. There's a peace process which America has initiated. It is very obvious that the Russians do not care about the peace process, and they are going to delay it and delay it and delay it, hoping to sort of gain back on the ground, which actually they're not doing, which is rather interesting. And the Europeans are looking at this. They don't think it's a very effective peace process, but at the end of the day, Ukraine is seen by the Europeans as a country that belongs to the continent of Europe. We always knew that. That is slated one day to become a member of the European Union, and might be sooner than planned because of Russia. Russia is pushing Ukraine into being accepted in the European Union, which is not their goal. And they don't think much of that peace process, and sometimes they have air brackets around it. But it's not so much a question of being part of it, as the Ukrainians are the ones who decide. And it's not seen as something where our influence is to go is to be pushed by presence there. They don't take it very seriously, but they accept that the Ukrainians have to listen as long as it's feasible to listen. We've seen that Zelensky last year was insulted by the American vice president in the White House, in the Oval Office, and Zelensky, he doesn't care about his ego, but he does care about his country. And he let this happen and pleaded for his country the best way he could. It has actually, that scene in the Oval Office has pushed Europe to even more sort of commitment to Ukraine and to a much, much higher spending of GDP. We went from 2% to 5% of GDP in defense. This actually was a request from President Trump when he was president the first time. So in many ways, that's the answer. The answer is yes, we are going to help Ukraine, and yes, we are going to spend more on our defense industry.
To spend more on the defense industry, long term, of course, there will be a great role, great change. And finally, how do you ultimately see this conflict ending? Are we going to see, let's say, a negotiated settlement this year?
I don't know. I have no idea. Honestly, I do not know, and I don't think anybody knows. And again, there are polls being taken in Ukraine, and right now, this is exactly what not only Zelensky, but his two opponents. He has two opponents. Next time there's a presidential election, the Ukrainian constitution forbids holding elections during a war, because how do you get people who are being bombed into polling stations? How do you even it's very hard to organize. And when President Trump tried to bully Ukrainians into holding a presidential election, the other two candidates, the former President Poroshenko and the current Ukrainian ambassador to Britain, Zaluzhny, who is the former chief of staff, both said, we're not running. We're not running. This is pressure, and we are going to follow the Ukrainian constitution, and we are not going to oppose Zelensky, so he will be re-elected with 99% of the vote. So, again, this is a country that stands behind its president. As today, even the people who plan to oppose him politically when the country is at peace.
Ruslan, 30 seconds.
I don't know, but I think we need to restore the balances, security balances in Europe, and the main role of this is of United States, Europe, European Union, and Russia, of course, in this process. And this is the key to end this conflict. We need to restore the balance. We don't need to intend to rebuild the past.
Yeah, the balance of power in the European continent. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.